Hello, and welcome to the CoStar News Hotels podcast. I'm Trevor Simpson, staff writer and staff editor for CoStar News, and I'm joined today by my wonderful colleague, Didio Pequeno, director of hospitality market analytics for the Northeast and Midwestern U.S. for CoStar Group. Didio, thank you so much for joining. How are you doing today?
You're welcome. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Happy Friday to you. Happy to be
Happy
here.
Friday. Yeah, I guess it is important to note that this podcast will be releasing on Wednesday, May 27th. We're recording this on Friday, May 22nd. Probably won't be too many changes in what we talk about from now until then, but there's been a lot going on with the World Cup, our topic of the day. And a lot of the talk has been unrelated to the soccer or football being played on the pitch. I've
Of
done a
course.
handful of stories from the hotel industry's perspective, charting the excitement and high expectations back when the schedule was initially released back in December of last year, to the sentiment steadily declining as the months went on. But now I kind of feel like what I've been seeing is more optimism as we get closer to the event, which I guess was always to be expected. But I'd say today our goal, Didio, is to try and cut through some of the noise and get down to brass tacks. Um, to me, the pessimism was never in terms of the impact. You would think that it's going to be a significant year over year boost for each of the host markets, mostly in the ability to push rates. But the questions that I was hearing was more in terms of how big of an impact it's going to have compared to maybe the expectations a year ago. So, all that being said, here we are in late May, mere weeks away from the start of the tournament on June 11th. Didio, where do things stand in terms of hotel performance on the books and just the overall sentiment from your perspective?
Sure. So I think first we got to take a step back and look at where sentiment was last year. I think last year, and even going back further a few years, once the World Cup was announced in the US, it was kind of like everyone thought, as we said, like the World Cup was going to be 104 Super Bowls. Those
Hmm.
are always very lofty expectations. I think as we get closer to the World Cup, now the sentiment has, to your point, gone a little bit pessimistic. And we're hearing people say that the World Cup is going to underwhelm. Of course, I think actual performance is going to meet somewhere in the middle. When I talk to people, whether that be general managers or revenue managers around the country, I'm getting a lot of mixed signals. But I think the prevailing thought is that yes, the World Cup will still boost performance through the summer. Um, performance is gonna vary market by market. Some will perform better than others, of course, but it's not really about demand. It's more so about markets being able to drive rate. And I think
Right,
that's what a lot of the media coverage is not getting correct. There's a lot of coverages talking about that occupancy on the books is lower than last year in a lot of markets, but they're not looking at AER, and that's really the ticket. That's where hotels are really going to drive growth and performance.
absolutely. So you talk about how it's going to differ from market to market. From what you're seeing right now, which markets are the standouts and which ones are the ones kind of falling a little behind the top performers?
Sure. So I do want to preface my comments by saying that it's still a little bit early and
Yeah,
booking windows have shortened. So some of the markets I'm going to call out, I think Philadelphia stands out because aside from the World Cup, they're also going to host a bevy of events tied to America 250.
right.
They're also going to host MLB All Star Weekend in July. So both events will drive performance through the summer. Looking outside the U.S., you have Vancouver. That's a World Cup host city. And of the 13 markets in the US and Canada, it has the lowest room inventory. So I think that will benefit occupancy, drive compression, and drive rate growth as well. Um, Dallas also stands out because Dallas is set to serve as the international broadcast center, and it's also
Mm,
going to host the highest number of matches at nine. But being that it's the international broadcast center, I've spoken to people in the market there. They're expecting about 3 to 5,000 media members to
oh,
stay in
wow.
Dallas. So of course that's going to boost demand. But even there, they're expecting a slight bump in demand. a significant growth in rate, and ultimately that will boost RevPAR. And then, of course, you have New York. New York just continues to perform well um, through the first couple of months of the year, really strong performance, and we expect that momentum to carry over through the World Cup. And then, of course, it's going to host the final on July 19th.
Yeah.
In terms of markets that will underperform, I don't want to single anybody out. I think
Uh-huh.
it's still a little bit early. I think one city that is on my radar, though, is Kansas City. It's also a
Mhm.
relatively small market, but they recently passed House Bill, I believe it's House Bill 2481, which has made it easier for locals to operate Airbnbs. So I'm curious to see if that's going to drive demand, but demand into short term rentals
Mm.
away from hotels. So again, that's something that we'll just keep an eye on, but we'll be able to report back on after the World Cup has wrapped up. But I think that's something that kind of stands out to me. That doesn't mean that Kansas is going to be the worst performing market
Right.
by no means, but just something that I'll keep my eyes on going forward.
Yeah, like you said, even though we are just a few weeks out, the booking windows for this have been very condensed, so we still do not know what the overall impact will be, and even just looking on the books, it doesn't mean that that's how the performance is actually going to play out right now. Sort of on the same topic of that, or a sort of similar side note, our colleague Jan Freitag has been saying that it could be the tale of two World Cups where the group stage overall underwhelms, while the knockout stage is when momentum will really start to pick up. And given the setup of this year's tournament, it's the biggest World Cup yet in terms of teams participating and
Right.
total matches. This theory might have some legs. Some sources that I've spoken to have mentioned that there are less marquee matchups in the group stage because of the sheer amount of teams. So, what are your thoughts on this tale of two World Cups idea?
I think Jan definitely has the right idea. I think when you look at it, it's a total of 104 matches. 78 matches will be played in the US, 57 played in the month of June, and then the rest, the knockout stage, played in July. I think as we get into the knockout stages, well, the hope is really, I shouldn't say hope. I have no preference in terms of what team makes it. But when you think about those larger teams like Spain, Argentina, England, France that have like these massive fan bases, if they advance into the knockout stages and make really go far, I think then we're going to see a lot of travelers spending more money on hotels and travel, and that will benefit World Cup performance and hotel performance in general.
Yeah, and I mean, we're gonna get into it a little bit coming up here, but just how expensive everything is around the World Cup, it would kind of make sense for some fans to be like, okay, if I'm going to be spending a lot of money regardless, I may as well wait until it's the most important match to
Right,
finally pony up some money.
for sure.
Um, so when it comes to the headwinds surrounding the World Cup, you hear about international inbound demand not coming in for a myriad of different reasons, whether it's the travel bans, the expensive and difficult visa process, or just general malaise when it comes to the US politically. You hear about cost on the hospitality side, but also the cost of actually going to a match. The tickets for these matches are insanely high, especially on the resale market. FIFA returned a great deal of their room block holds, certainly more than previously expected. And then, even though FIFA grouped certain markets together to try to reduce the travel miles from match to match for each team, it's still a really spaced out tournament, especially
For sure.
considering how consolidated the 2022 World Cup in Qatar was. Um, from your vantage point, how are these headwinds having an effect on hotel performance and demand in general?
I think you bring up a lot of good points, a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I think it is tough to say, but I think the first point that one of the major points to me that stood out is when you think about the World Cup being in Qatar, which is a rather small country, versus
Mhm.
the US, which is one of the largest countries, that presents a bit of a problem. It's great for each individual city, all the 11 host cities in the US. Yes, they'll all see a a boost in performance, mainly by rate, as we've discussed. But it also makes the World Cup feel a bit disjointed. And it'll be difficult for someone who's in New York, maybe who wants to go watch a match in LA, or that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Most likely, unless if they want to spend that kind of money. I know I can't afford it, but more power to them.
Uh-huh.
So I think that that's a big point. And then I think also just with everything going in the US right now and the climate, there's a lot of anti-American sentiment. As you said, there's a lot of confusion around the visa process. So
Yeah.
that issue isn't unique to the World Cup. I spent a lot of time covering DC, and there's been a noticeable downturn in hotel performance in DC really over the past year. And a lot of that has to do with a lot of the same issues the World Cup may face, where some people just opting to avoid DC and opting to avoid US because of everything that's going on here.
Yeah.
So I think that may impact the World Cup as well.
Yeah, it was interesting. I did a story last month or 2 months ago about, performance in Canada and Mexico, and some of the sources did say they were like, "Yeah, we do expect to have a little bit of an uptick in demand because of people wanting to avoid going to the US, especially for those teams that have some matches in Canada or Mexico and a match in the US. If they have a preference to pick one or the other, they're going to pick the non-US market." Again, we don't know how much that's actually going to make an
Right.
impact, but it's something to consider at the very least.
No, I think you're definitely onto something there because I took a look at occupancy on the books for the three host cities in Mexico: Monterrey, Guadalajara, and Mexico City. All three look really good in June,
Yeah.
up over last year. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, yes, you can travel to Mexico. It's a smaller country. You could
Mhm.
potentially visit all three cities, and you're going to pay way less than what you would pay in the US. It's still going to be expensive, of course, but it'll
Yeah.
be less than what you'd pay here in the States. Canada as well, with Vancouver and Toronto being host cities there. So not seeing quite the pickup that we're seeing in Mexico and Canada, but then hotel performance in Canada in 2025 had been strong because of the whole Choose Canada movement.
Right.
So those numbers are affected a little bit by that, but I still expect Vancouver and Toronto to perform well.
And that sort of plays back into the whole tale of 2 World Cups idea because the US hosts from the round of 16 on in the knockout stage, the US will host each match. So you can kind of see, or it kind of would make some sense that the non-US markets perform well in June in the group
Right,
stage, and then
right,
once the US is the sole host of all the matches, start to see
exactly.
some pickup in July, yeah.
Exactly, and then you'll have July 4th, all the stuff for America
Yeah.
250, so there'll be a ton of things coming together at the same time in July, so I think you're right on the mark.
So, since we're with CoStar, we have access to a lot of data, a lot of numbers that can help inform how an event such as this one may play out,
Mhm.
but it's not going to tell the whole story until the final whistle blows from East Rutherford, New Jersey, and the trophy is handed out on July 19th. Um, as of today, any predictions on what the overall takeaway will be when this is all said and done?
I think the overall takeaway will be when we think about these large events is one, the logistics. Yes, it's great to have all these events going on in multiple different cities, but because they feel a little bit disjointed and each city is kind of doing their own thing in terms of fan fests, and fans are responsible for getting around and traveling on their own, is like, how can we plan these major events more efficiently and make them easier for travelers to get to?
Yeah.
And then I think the second takeaway for me is just simmer down a little bit. Like when it first got announced, everyone went super crazy, 104 Super Bowls, and then now the sentiment has totally swung the other direction.
Uh-huh.
And of course, I feel like performance is going to land, and the overall sentiment will land somewhere in the middle. But I think it's next time we have a major event, whether it be the Olympics at LA, it's just being more grounded about expectations going forward.
Yeah, I do wonder if some of the initial optimism was coming from obviously 2025 was a bit of a disappointing year for
Right,
hoteliers.
for
So
sure.
they were trying to find something to cling on to for hope,
Right.
and the World Cup was a easy target for that. But
Yeah.
I think I think they would take, what you're saying, the kind of the middle ground in terms of, it's not going to be It's not gonna be a dud. Well, I'm not
It's
saying it's not
definitely
gonna be a
not.
dud, but you know what I'm saying. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. You're right. I mean, it's not going to be a dud.
Yeah.
And I think again, as we said before, like I think a lot of the media coverage is focused on occupancy on the books potentially being lower than last year or demand being down. When the conversation should shift towards talking more about rate. Like some hotels may be okay with losing 10 percentage points on occupancy, but gaining 20 or 30% in ADR.
Right.
RevPAR will still increase. So I think afterwards, maybe that becomes more of a discussion as opposed to people focusing on demand being coming in lower than expected.
Yeah, absolutely. I do think it will be interesting to see how the World Cup is used as a testing ground for the US as it prepares to host 2028 Summer Olympics in LA. And the US will also host the 2031 Women's World Cup and the 2034 Winter Olympics. So a few mega sporting events coming up in the next decade. So it'll be interesting to see how everything plays out and the lessons that are learned from this one.
There you go. You hit the nail on the head. The lessons learned. Hopefully, we'll apply those to the World Cup in 2031.
Yeah. Well, okay, Didio, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on?
Not really. I think we hit on all the right topics. I think now everyone can kind of just sit back and enjoy the World Cup and look forward to improved hotel performance. Because despite what everyone's saying, I think hotels will perform well. So I think now we can just sit back, enjoy the matches, and see how everything shakes out.
There you go. Didio, thank you so much for joining the podcast today. I think this will help calm the nerves of a lot of hoteliers, hopefully, and hopefully it'll be an exciting World Cup.
Hopefully, thanks, Trevor. I appreciate you. Thanks for having me.
I'm Terence Baker, News Editor, Europe, Middle East and Africa, and I'm the host of The Upgrade, a CoStar News Hotels podcast for the EMEA region. In it, I discuss with special guests the pressures, challenges, joys and exhilaration that comes with managing, owning and developing hotels in our glorious multifaceted industry. Discovering the EMEA region from the scenic northern shores of Norway to heights of Table Mountain in South Africa, and most likely some chat about birdwatching, distance running and the English Premiership. Join us wherever you find your podcasts, on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify and on other platforms.
This episode of the CoStar News Hotels podcast was recorded on May 22nd, 2026 and edited by Trevor Simpson. Visit costar.com/hotel news for the latest industry coverage and look for all of our podcasts on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or your platform of choice.